Thank you. Hello, good evening, and welcome to the meeting of the whole regarding aggregate industries. At this point, I will now turn it over to Councilor O'Neill to run the meeting of the whole regarding aggregate. Councilor O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening. The special permit granted in 2002 requires aggregate industries to submit an annual report to our committee for our review. That was done at the end of February. The report includes details on the quarrying and hot asphalt plant operations, and also includes information for each of the quarry blasts that occurred in 2019, the proposed blasting plan for 2020, or the current year, noise monitoring test results from the quarry operations that would include rock crushing, environmental impacts from the operations with required air and water quality tests. Tonight is our opportunity to make comments regarding the annual report from 2019, as well as recommend any changes. I believe we have representatives from Aggregate Industries with us tonight to answer any questions. I see Jarrett Temple, who is the Northeast Region Manager for Land and Environment. And I also see Sean Clancy, who's the manager at the Peabody Quarry on Russell Street. So also, I apologize, I can see Kurt Hine, who's here. He's the Aggregate Operations Manager. So thank you for joining us tonight. Under suspension of the rules, I'd like to move to accept 3 late communications regarding this hearing from the Fire Department, Department of Public Services, as well as the Board of Health. So moved.
You heard the motion by Councilor O'Neill. Roll call motion. Roll call on the motion.
Councilor Welton.
Yes.
Sasslaw.
Yes.
Mitsoulas.
Yes.
Gould.
Yes.
Charis.
Yes.
Manny Martin is absent. Turco. Absent. O'Neill.
Yes.
Melville.
Yes.
Ginn.
Yes.
And Rosagall.
Yes.
Motion carries 9-0, 2 absent.
I'll now turn it back to Councilor O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. President. As this annual report for 2019 is over 900 pages, I just want to address some of the major areas for not only my fellow councilors, but anyone who's viewing or at least listening in by phone. For 2019, there were 14 blasts at the quarry compared to 10 in 2018. The Peabody Fire Department has a representative monitoring each of the blasts as they occur. Per the late communication, there were no written property damage by any residents to the fire department in 2019. There was, however, one complaint for noise and vibration to the department on April 16th, 2020, which is this year, to kind of clarify that. As I mentioned a few moments ago, the annual report includes the proposed blasting plan for the upcoming year, which is 2020. In that annual report, it had a map of the area that was going to be worked on, and we were actually able to have we were unable to have our annual pre-blast meeting with the neighborhood representatives this spring due to the current pandemic. However, we were able to conduct a meeting in mid-April via Zoom with members of the Aggregate Industries team, main blasting and drilling, Lieutenant Dowling from the Peabody Fire Department, as well as members of the neighborhood committee. We discussed the 2020 blasting plan in detail, and I'll just mention a few comments on it, just because obviously we're in the middle of the blasting season. It began on blues April 17th was the first blast. But anyways, they're estimating that it's going to be 20 blasts during this current year. However, that's going to depend on the economy and the need for aggregate, if you will, market conditions, the consumer demand, industrial need. The initial blasts were going to be located closer to the residents on Stiles Drive, which certainly would possibly create, potential noise, vibrations, or sound. So we went into detail with the blasting representatives as well as the aggregate folks, talking about how they were going to take precautions by bringing in blasting mats, which are not required, but they wanted to do that to make sure that the utmost approach to safety, prevent any fly rock issues in that area. So certainly they've been blasting since April. And we've had a few kind of calls or whatnot, just because of certainly the close proximity that some of the homes are on Stiles Drive with normal quarry operations. But this year certainly has just created a few more calls. But it seems to have been, it's progressing well. Certainly there's a lot more work to do that they have there. But I thank them for their flexibility in trying to set up the meeting so that even with the current health situation, we were able to have that meeting and go through details, and it was very informative. I do want to touch on the health departments. The Board of Health typically reviews the annual report, as do most of the departments in the city. And Sharon Cameron reviewed this year's and noted that the air quality data was in compliance and was below the threshold established by the Massachusetts DEP. And in terms of air quality, it was also below occupational exposure standards. So at the end of the day, they are in compliance with the requirements, not only with the state, but with special permits. And I'd say at this time, I'd like to just pause here and allow other councilors who may have questions on just the overall annual report or, ask any questions to the aggregate team. I would like the opportunity to touch on a few additional items after others have had the opportunity to speak. And Mr. President, I know it's not really a hearing, it's more of a council review, but there may be some residents who've called in. I just didn't know if there's a way to see if anyone else has any questions or wanted to comment. So sorry about all that.
That's okay. Under attendees or panelists, the only attendee is from City Hall. And
Okay.
As far as panelists goes, the only panelists that are on are counselors.
Right,
So there
okay.
is nobody that has their hand raised as far as the public goes.
Perfect,
So
okay.
at that point, I will turn it to the council for questions. Councilor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to Chairman O'Neill. The homes on Stiles, did they suffer any damage, Council?
No one has submitted any property damage claims, but many of the residents that those homes have been there for 50 years. So certainly there's blasting that's gone in the past. They will tell you that there's been some kind of years past. There's been some issues or whatnot, but there's been no. I think in the last 2 years there's been no claims submitted by any of the residents. A lot of them have certainly lived to deal with the noise that occurs in blasts, and they understand that that operation has been there, and they're thankful that the special permit is in place to allow them to operate, but also protect the quality of life of the residents. So they've dealt with it a lot. Certainly, I don't want to dwell on it, but it was, I think, as recently as 2015 that there was a fly rock incident on Stiles Drive. But I will say, and I'll comment later, that the current local management of aggregate industries, which is obviously a part of a huge conglomerate, in the last few years has really been taking steps to understand the past difficulties that the residents have had, and I commend them for understanding that and trying to acknowledge it. They still have their business objectives, and certainly we have to be vigilant. But I do believe they've been responsive, at least in my experience on the council since 2017.
Councilor O'Neill, I commend you for your professionalism and diligence in developing a relationship with Aggregate, and it shows from the way things have been progressing. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you, Councilor Gould, but I would just say that there's a lot of residents who've worked very hard on this, and certainly prior councilors. Like I said, in my, fortunately and unfortunately for Aggregate, they move people around in different roles. So a lot of times the people change, but like I said, my experience has been they understand, and we not only do I say it, but the residents tell them, like, you may have other operations in Saugus or in New Hampshire or elsewhere, but this is how things have to work in Peabody because this is the special permit. And like I said, they do get that. They hear it not only from me, but they hear it from the residents. And like I said, that's important to not only hear them, but then to react when there is an issue that arises. So sorry for the long answer, Councilor Gould, but I can't take full credit.
That's okay.
It's a work.
Oh, that's good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mr. President. All set.
Thank you, Councilor Gould. Councilor Sasslaw.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you, Council O'Neill, for going over the report thoroughly and sharing what you know. I also did want to compliment the local management. I know over the last few years, since you folks have done a very good job as far as publicizing when you're blasting. I get very few phone calls anymore. Some people who aren't used to being home on Thursdays now, that's what's going on. But as far as you do emails, you do robocalls, and so that's been very helpful. And I appreciate that. And if any residents want to get emails or robocalls and they aren't, I'm sure they can reach out to either Council Neal or myself, local management. But that's been very helpful. I want to thank you for continuing to communicate with the local neighbors to let them know what's going on so there's no surprises. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Sasslaw. Councilor Turco.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to Councilor O'Neill. Mark, thank you for the synopsis, and I hope it's not out of line for me to mention that the two residents, the two moms that have taken on the Recess for Randy playground at the Brown School had asked me to extend the thanks to the aggregate industries folks. We ran into a snafu where we needed roughly about 200 tons or more of fill to go underneath the flooring for the playground, and aggregate was nice enough to donate that material to that program. So I really did want to say thank you for aggregate. It was quite a cost savings for those moms who did most of the fundraising themselves. And again, it seems like we've come miles and miles with aggregate industries. So that's great to hear, and thank you to all of you. That's all.
Thank you, Councilor Turco. Councilor O'Neill. Seeing no further questions or comments from the council, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to touch on a couple items that, well, first of all, I wanted to give people the opportunity to chat and ask questions either to me or the aggregate folks. But there are a couple items that I want to just run through. At last year's meeting, we made a motion, council made a motion to request Department of Public Services to evaluate whether there should be any changes to the current testing and monitoring of the groundwater at the site, which is done on an annual basis. And I mentioned last year, but the special permit initially required, and certainly it was, enacted in 2002, and certainly it was up to the Department of Public Services at the time. In 2006, they made the decision based on the data they had, which is, perfectly fine, and the permit actually allowed for a decrease in the testing. But I was concerned as, there's certainly a water that comes off the property in its normal course of operations. And I just want to make sure that as it goes through the swales and the I guess what I would say, the system set in place to make sure that water doesn't affect our drinking water because it goes into the Norris Brook quarry. Norris Brook, I wanted to make sure that they were comfortable with remaining at the annual testing. And as part of the late communication that we've already accepted, Bob Langley did review the testing data over the past few years and said that they were perfectly fine with continuing as is. I just wanted to make that note that we made that motion last year and wanted them to look at it. And I just wanted to comment on that. So like I said, we made the motion, I suggested there was nothing that I was seeing that, caused me to have concern or issues with testing, but I just wanted to have another, I guess, check on it, if you will, because it had been a while. Two small items regarding the annual report that are, one is housekeeping, and it would seem picayune, but we obviously just want to kind of just make sure the information is accurate. The letter of transmittal that goes to the city from aggregate mentioned that, included are the minutes of approval from 2018 and talked about the meeting date being March 14th, 2019. That actually was April 25th, 2019. That doesn't change anything in the annual report, but I just wanted to mention that. Both of these items have been, addressed with Jared and Kurt and Sean just in our pre-blast meeting. But the more important one I think that is, I want to make sure I highlight is that the pre-bat, because of the requirements of the special permit, residents are, required to be notified by the company regarding, the siren process to alert them of an impending blast, but also pre-blast surveys so that they could, be aware if, there's property damage to their homes. the company hires a firm to go out and assess those individual properties, take pictures, videos, and evaluate it to see that if there's actually a future claim of property damage, that it can be kind of negotiated and determined. But my concern is that the current letter that was included and I guess sent out to the neighbors, it was issued by the Precise, who is the third-party vendor. Their information talked about that. The letter stated, quote, "In the event that you elect to have a survey performed, a copy of this survey will be provided to the Peabody Fire Department per section A, ... Actually, under the special permit, it says these independent specialists shall submit a copy of the condition survey for each residence surveyed to the homeowner and the fire department." That's important. Now, I know there's a lot of residents who lived in that neighborhood and understand how the process works, but we certainly have people who have moved into the neighborhood. I just wouldn't want them to be unaware of the ability to get a copy of the survey and have one done. So it may seem minor in Picayune, but it's important, as certainly where we're dealing with potential damage to people's home. I just wanted to mention that. I certainly would expect it to be corrected in next year's notification to the residents. And then I guess I'll just want to comment on a couple things and certainly pause afterwards, because I think anyone from aggregate might want to comment or I guess I've mentioned a few things, but I mentioned a few moments ago that I believe that Aggregate Industries is the local management, to be clear, has been taking steps to kind of address some of the past history and work with the neighborhood. And it's great to hear Councilor Turco's comment about them offering an assistance with the playground at the Brown School. That's great. But there are two incidents that I just wanted to kind of mention that came up. And part of it's just to kind of talk about and I'll mention it. First was from reports in November, more recent, November 22nd. We had a truck arrive at the site before opening early morning around 4 o'clock. And because the plant and the operations were not open, the driver or the operator of the vehicle, parked the vehicle, on the roadway heading towards the plant and was idling the truck, waiting for it to open. Certainly the residents, no one wants to hear a truck, operating in their neighborhood at that point in time. So they reached out to me. I contacted Kurt Hine, and he quickly looked into it, and found out that, this driver was, coming to the plant for the first time, was due to drop off equipment, and certainly was apologetic, called me back right away, and called the resident. But more importantly, while it's never good to have that situation happen, they recognized the situation and put up signs at the site that say no idling of trucks allowed. So, I'm not trying to beat them up. I'm saying that that's something that was, you could say, out of their control. A driver coming up first time, not knowing local rules, but they at least, acted, didn't, try to push us off and ignore residents' requests. And like I said, I commend them for doing that. And the signs have appeared to work. I've had no other calls on that. So I did want to comment. That's great. The second, call it, situation that occurred in 2019, as we're discussing that, was the week of June 24th. There were 3 incidences, unfortunately, of trucks, entering the site and leaving after the 4 p.m. closing. And I certainly, that's against, obviously, the plan to shut down at 4 o'clock. And no trucks are supposed to be entering. And once again, I reached out to Kurt Hine. Sean Clancy hadn't started at that point. I would have called him, as he's the local manager there. But either way, not good. Once again, Kurt Hine responded to me immediately with the concerns, got the information, and came back with a response, which is they're going to make sure they, reinforce the local, with local management and employees that, this can't happen. And then also make sure that the gates are locked at precisely at 4 o'clock. So once again, issues that arise with residents that are legitimate, and I commend them for responding, which we would expect them to do. But like I said, they have their own business. And I'll comment, and I'll stop here, and that, like, some people might be listening, or other councils might be hearing, like, why is O'Neill mentioning these? I mention them because, to the residents that surround that operation, which is significant, they've lived with it for a number of years, and that's, that's part of the situation. But, I think it's important that, what might not seem important to someone listening or, watching on it is important to them. It's their quality of life. And that's why it's so important that, that special permit, which, is to be complied with, is why we follow it and why residents are so adamant that, we keep on it. And while I've complimented appropriately Aggregate Industries local management, I will state for the record that the Peabody City Council has little tolerance for violations of the company's special permit. So I'll stop there. I just wanted to kind of make those last comments regarding that. But certainly I kind of have prattled, as my wife would say, but want to give the opportunity for anyone at Aggregate Industries or any fellow councilors who want to comment. Thank you.
Anybody at Aggregate would like to speak? Now is the time.
Yeah, Councilor O'Neill, thank you very much for your comments. What's really unique about this quarry is its proximity to our neighbors. And when these incidents happen, we try to respond as quickly as possible in a positive manner. As you stated before, we have worked very hard with you personally, trying to iron out some of the problems that have happened in the past, make sure they don't happen again, and to smooth out the relationship we have with our neighbors there. We do, first and foremost, want to be good neighbors. As you had mentioned, we do have a business to run, but that doesn't mean we can't do things the right way and make headway with all of our neighbors in that community. Like the local project that Mr. Turco referenced with the teachers at the Brown School. Those are the kind of things that we really like to sink our teeth into. These are community engagement projects, especially in times like this when people are hurting for money and they run out of resources. These are projects that we really like to be part of. So thanks again, Councilor O'Neill, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you, Jack.
Councilor O'Neill.
I guess at this time, if there's no further questions, in summary, the annual report submitted complies with all the requirements of the special permit as granted in 2002. So at this time, I would move for the council to approve the 2019 annual report. So moved.
We have the motion by Councilor O'Neill. Seeing no discussion on the motion, roll call vote.
Councilors Welton,
Yes.
Sasslaw,
Yes.
Mitsoulas,
Yes.
Gould,
Yes.
Charis,
Yes.
Manning Martin,
yes,
Turco,
Yes.
O'Neill,
Yes.
Melville,
Yes.
McGinn,
Yes.
Rozignol.
Yes.
Motion carries 11-0.
All's good.
At this point, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We have the motion, roll call vote.
Councilors Welton,
Yes.
Sasslaw,
Yes.
Mitsoulas,
Yes.
Gould,
Yes.
Charis,
Yes.
Manning Martin, Turco,
Yes.
O'Neill,
Yes.
Melville.
Yeah.
McGinn,
Yes.
Rozignol.
Yes.
Motion carries 10-0.
Thank you, everyone.